Hello and welcome to another episode of the University Duel Podcast, where we talk about university life and more. With me today, I have Mr. Timilehin, but I'm going to allow him to introduce himself properly to us and tell us a little bit about what he does. Hi, Timilehin.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me here. My name is Timilehin. I am a product/business developer, a serial entrepreneur. I run a couple of companies, both on the hardware space, in power and in fintech.
Oh wow, very interesting. So we've been having a lot of conversations around 9 to 5 versus entrepreneurship. And you seem like, so do you juggle both or you are just an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurship is 9 to 5 or 9
No,
to 9
it's 9 to 9.
or 9 to 9, right?
It's 9 to 9.
So I don't really understand the difference. If you really work for a company, even if you're a salary earner and you like your job, you still have a task that you're trying to fulfill, and you're trying to make that. You still want to balance your life, right? Work and balance. So I think there's no real difference to me.
I think that's very interesting an interesting way to put it. I think what people will say is the difference is the sense of ownership and responsibility. So, for example, as a 9 to 5, I want to do my job to the best possible ability that I can, but I don't care. Not that I don't care, but if the company isn't making any money, that's not an excuse for them not to pay my salary, if you get what I mean. But with entrepreneurship, you have to make it work.
Yes, there's that aspect. So I think as an entrepreneur or you CEO, there are a few people you work for. You work for your shareholders, you work for your team, and that's your staff, and then you work for your customer. In my own case, I think about it the other way around. So I work for my customers, then my staff, then my shareholder. I am just part of the shareholding. I'm typically not in most companies, there's no one single shareholder. You cannot return capital to your shareholders if you do not service your customers really well.
Absolutely.
And that's the same thing you see with your team if you don't service your team well. Now, if you're 9 to 5, you might have different stakeholders, right? So maybe yours is your boss, your customer, your client, colleagues. And it's the same use case. Clearly, the responsibilities are a little bit different. But at the end of the day, when you think about it, it's about the same thing. People think about it more in terms of return on work. I get paid equity, or the owner of the business, you get paid a lot of money, or salary. Well, if the business is not doing well, the guy that earning salary is happier. If the business is doing well, the person that is earning on the equity side, like myself, is happier. So it's a mix of both of them.
Absolutely. I think that's an interesting take. But today we're going to talk about the education system in Nigeria, and if you could change anything about the Nigerian education system, what would it be? I think the question would be, what would you not change about the system? But let's not be mean. So what would you change about the Nigerian education system?
So I have an interesting take about the educational system generally and specifically to Nigeria. I think education teaches two things. First, it teaches us how to learn. So it doesn't matter what you studied in school. What the educational system tries to teach you is how to learn. The second thing it does for you is it teaches you how to socialize, to build your network, how to do those two things. I think one of the things that is missing is that the educational system is never going to be fit for purpose in terms of, it's always going to be lagging. I got into university in 2007. Covenant University. So I hope I'm not too old. When I was getting into university, being a programmer was a niche, weird thing to do. Right? Even ICT was just coming up. Right now, ICT is going, what it means to be a programmer 14 years ago is very different from what it means to be a programmer today. When I was entering, I studied chemical engineering. Being an engineer was all the rave. I am an engineer today. I struggle to find more artisans than I struggle to find engineers. And engineers are useless without artisans. And so we have a shortage of skilled welders, skilled laborers, skilled artisans. And so the economy has changed from what it was 20 years ago. And it feels like we produced for what we thought we needed 20 years ago. And today we don't need that. And now we need something different. And so there's the educational gap. And so I would think that the educational system should be geared more around fundamentals, right? So it doesn't matter where engineering would go tomorrow. people need to have physical, practical skills, right?
Absolutely.
I think programming is a physical, practical skill. Yes, we would have chemical engineers, computer engineers, but everybody needs to learn programming. People need to learn welding and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I would think we should improve. Understand that education is always a lagging, and so there must be a fundamental skill set that everybody needs to acquire over time. We have more tailors now that went to universities to study
biochemistry.
Yes.
Everybody that I have met that studied biochemistry is doing something extremely
really different. And now we're all everybody is tailoring, is making a lot more money, and so on and so forth. So we're seeing that shift. Yoruba is called Ishewo. We're seeing a shift, a generational shift where Ishewo was looked down on, and we're seeing that turn around. And now Ishewo people are making a lot more money. I have carpenter friends that are making a lot more money than 95
Crazy.
guys.
So I think this is so interesting because just earlier today I was having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about the public school system in Nigeria, and we were talking about it in comparison to private schools and how the edge that private schools have is money, because you're paying more, so you're obviously going to get more. But unfortunately, a bulk of the people that go to public schools cannot afford to pay the more that the private school people are paying. But that also now brought me to the point that in Nigeria, we don't do things for what they are for, more for just like the prestige of it. So I went to university. And in other countries that are more advanced than we are, that are doing better, like not everybody goes to university, because university is for scholarship, which is amazing. You need your scholars. But the bulk of your population are not going to be scholars, or do not even need to be scholars. Like ancient Greek, they were just the few philosophers. So it's a case where I also think we need to empower the polytechnics. We need to empower the technical schools. In fact, if we're going to talk about this, the education system is not even going to be limited to university. From high school, you should be able to learn carpentry in high school, and it shouldn't be just so theoretical. So by the time you're leaving high school, you can go get like a degree in plumbing at some plumbing school, and then of course that will lead to a change also in how we see some vocations, because in the US you will go and check on YouTube on how to fix your tap, because by the time you call the plumber, you're going to pay tons of money.
I think new statistics that came out of the US, I think plumbers are now currently one of the highest paid vocations in the US compared to even other what you call scholarly roles. Yes, I totally agree with you. I also had the opportunity of going to a federal secondary school. I went to Duel. So we had woodworking. It wasn't called carpentry. We had woodworking. We had metal work. So if you were on the engineering path, they expect you to do metal work. If you're on the architectural path, they expected you to do woodworking. If you were on the agric path or whatever, you do agric. And then only the sciences or only the medical guys did biology. Right? I think what we see is a gap in the quality of the educational system in terms of what private schools can afford, right? So Odobolu was really, really big. It was a well-funded school compared to what you see in typical private secondary schools. And so we had these facilities. Very few private schools can afford this. And so maybe what we need to think about, at least on the secondary school level, to touch back on what you were saying, is maybe you need to have more specialized private schools. So I'm running a private school, but my secondary school is focused on engineering. So if you're not going to be an engineer, don't come, because we don't have biology. And so you won't be able to get into medical school if you come here. Or it's catered towards woodworking and the rest. And so don't come and do biology here. We don't have time for that. So we need to have those types of conversation. Even on the university level, I think the biggest advantage you get when you school in a private university is the network effect. At least for me, I would say it's the network effect. The quality of the education is averagely the same. It doesn't matter whether you went to UI or you went to Covenant University, you are going to learn about the same thing. The question is, what is the network effect? What's the quality of people that you are friends with, that you are schoolmates with? And then you pay for the fact that you are unlikely to have strike. Now you see that even with Uni Ilorin, they don't have strike, they pay a little bit more. So I think the biggest advantage is the network effect. I have a lot of friends that did masters. They didn't do any worse than the international students in the UK, in the US, because they schooled in Nigeria. So by and large, it doesn't matter where you schooled. You learn about the same thing. It's about the network effect. And but all of us then come out and are not practical, like you pointed out. We're only good for academic work, and we have to learn that.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the 6th of June, 1859, Babington Macaulay started an initiative with financial support from James Davis, Daniel Taiwo, Moses Johnson, and a few others, opening the door for the many generations in Nigeria. What are you doing for posterity? How do you want to be remembered? High School Duel, Back to You Basics, starting July 5th, 2025.
So, a couple of things I want to jump at. I'll start with the last one, which is, so we go out of the country and sometimes we struggle. Not because, so we struggle in some things and excel extremely in some things. You're not going to outread a Nigerian. You're not going to like give back to me what the teacher gave to me. But with critical thinking and application, we struggle with that. Then the second thing I want to talk about in two ways, in high schools and in universities, is the government. So for example, I'm a very multifaceted person. When I was in high school, my first semester in in senior school, I was doing biology. I was an art student, but I was doing biology, geography, economics, government, and French.
Yeah.
That is such a fantastic lineup of subjects, because I could do a lot with that on a social science level. Yeah. And then when I was even in junior school, I wanted to go to the sciences, but I absolutely hated physics. So, and then there was this senior that I had, was great with government, was great with geography, but he didn't like physics. So it's like, it's too rigid, because they called my mom for me and said that I'm not studying anything, because they couldn't streamline me to arts or science or commercial, but if you look at those courses that I'm doing, there was so much I could have done with them. Yeah. So that's on one hand, the streamlining of you're a science student, you're an art student, that's it. Then when I was in in university, I went to PAU. Then in PAU, I think you took out a whole term, if not the whole year, to do your IT. Yeah. By the time we wanted to do our accreditation, like renew our accreditation or whatever, they were like, nah, that we can't do that. That reduce that into 3 months.
It's actually useless.
So the government itself isn't really the system is. I don't know why we're so set in our ways, so rigid. And even when I'm growing older, I realized a lot of the students in school that teachers used to demonize and everything probably had learning disabilities, and if we found out one thing that they were good at, they would do it better than the average smart kid. So I think we need to work hand in hand with the government. I mean, the government is...
There's a disconnect between if you're in government, you are probably in your 50s, 60s.
And that's how you went. So.
And at your time, what you could see is this what we needed. If you are in the working class now, you're in your 20s, early 30s. You see, we have two different stories of what the world is. And then if you're actually in school, you're in your teenage years. So there needs to be more collaboration across the ages on what needs to happen and what we need to have. Also, we need more conversations with the private sector. In terms of what does the private sector
actually need.
And what do they think they would need in 20 years. And this is where you start to see conversations around what's your 2030 plan as a country, right? And what's the role of private sectors in that? What's the role of government as a regulator? And then what is the school system producing to fit in that? And that cannot be taken in isolation of the global context, right? You know, JACPA is a major phenomenon. So if I want to JACPA and I could see the future in 2017, I would learn programming, right? Because that allows me JACPA a lot easier than even medicine, right?
Absolutely.
And so we need that think tank, thinking, okay, where do we want to be in 2050? And what kind of labor do we want to produce? What kind of educational system do we need, both for the private sector locally and considering what the global requirements would be like?
Absolutely. Like, I'm inclined to agree 100%. I really hope that, because I'm not very optimistic, if I'm being honest, but I really hope that at some point push comes to shove and we're able to evolve into what we really need to be to make our country better.
Yes.
Thank you so much for
coming
on
having
the
me.
show.
Yes.
And that is all on this episode of the University Duel Podcast. See you next time. Bye.